Welcome to Speaking of Faith, conversations at the intersection of faith, life, and so much in between. My name is Chris Holmes. I'm the Stembler Scholar in Residence and Director of Biblical and Theological Education here at First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta. And I'm joined by Luke Timothy Johnson, Emeritus Professor of New Testament at Emory University and one of my mentors and advisors from doctoral work. Luke, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So for this segment, I want to talk about some of the basics of faith, and I'm sure we can get this done in just a few hours. But in this short video, I want to talk about some of the sort of core defining aspects of the Christian faith. And so I'll start there. What is faith?
Faith has many dimensions. I think the best description of it is the response of the whole person to the living God. That is to say, it involves all of a person.
Right.
Okay. So what are some of its elements? Faith begins with belief, but it doesn't end with belief. A lot of people think faith and belief are the same thing. It's not. But belief is important. As the letter to the Hebrews says, you have to believe that God exists before you try to approach God.
Yeah.
I have to believe you're real if I'm going to keep talking to you.
Right.
So belief is really important, that God creates us, we are ordered to God. That's a kind of a cognitive element of faith. I talk about that in my book called The Creed, What Christians Believe and Why It Matters. I actually wanted to call it What Christians Say They Believe and Why It Ought to Matter, but they wouldn't let me give it that subtitle. So it begins with belief, and that's the creed. These are our public convictions.
Right.
Just like if you're a communist, your framework of convictions is the Communist Manifesto. That there are, it's class warfare. That's a basic kind of conviction that governs your life. But faith, as a response to God, involves, secondly, trust. And this is the aspect that Luther and Calvin picked up especially.
Yeah.
Now, I have to trust that you're real, and I have to trust that you're really showing yourself to me.
Right.
You're not faking. So notice that trust is entrusting. I'm actually taking a risk when I trust that you're real, right? It matters. If I act as God is the beginning and goal of the world, and I entrust myself to that, it's sort of like entrusting myself to a weekend in Vegas. I mean, there's a possibility of losing a lot of money.
Yeah.
This is like Pascal's wager, right? So the third element, though, is really at the heart of the New Testament. And that is that faith involves obedient hearing. That is, it's a responsive hearing. Because God calls us out of ourselves, as God called Abraham out of his homeland. God called Jesus out of his desire to live, to be willing to die for others. God calls, when Jesus wanted to teach, he was called to heal. When he wanted to rest, he was called to effort. So obedience means a hearing that overcomes resistance. Because we want to stay where we are.
Right.
We don't want to get into that larger world. Faith involves loyalty or fidelity. Right? Now, Gabriel Marcel calls this creative fidelity. It's the title of one of his books. And what he means by that is this, and I think it's really lovely. It's not dumb loyalty like, well, I said I was going to be a Christian, and by God, I'm going to keep on being a Christian, because that's the kind of guy I am. I'm loyal to my word, right? It's like telling your wife, well, I'm going to stick with you because I said I would.
Right.
Right? That's not what we mean. And it's not loyalty to the God I used to know. But God has just changed on me, and I want that God. I'm loyal to that God. It's like, if you take off 40 pounds, my wife, I'd still love you, right? Because that's the one I fell in love with.
Right.
Creative fidelity means changing with the other as the other changes.
Wow, yeah.
And so, applied to our relationship with God, as God shows us new things, we're loyal to the one who is showing us those new things. Just as in a spousal relationship, my wife reveals new aspects of herself. I can't keep on saying, hey, but you used to say this. I've got to get with the game.
Right.
So it involves belief, trust, obedience, loyalty, perseverance. These are all dimensions of faith.
Yeah. Wow, what a rich definition of faith.
And actually, it can include hope. Hope is not the expectation that something's going to happen. Hope is the trust in someone who is making this happen.
Yeah.
And so hope actually fits under faith rather well.
That's right. I wonder if in this discussion of faith, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what is sin and what is redemption then in this understanding of faith?
Well, I think sin is closure to the hearing of the living God. So it's the refusal to listen. Right? I mean, it's like a divorce.
Yeah.
It's over. Right? Now, sin has to be carefully distinguished from inadequacy and failure. If you are deeply psychologically disturbed, I'm inadequate to fixing that. But that doesn't mean that I should feel guilty.
Right.
If I failed to study for a math test and I got a C grade, I failed. But I could have done better, so I shouldn't feel guilty about that. That's just a failure. But if I choose to hurt you, if I know that what I say is going to hurt you, if I know that what I do is going to close off my conversation with God, that's sin. In that sense, sin is the rupture of obedient hearing. It's the closure. Now, it's not as easy to do as we might think. I mean, that's why we often get very confused. Now, we should have guilt about sin, but in contrast to Presbyterians who think of being guilty all the time about everything because, people are starving in India. People would be starving in India whether you were here or not. Guilt is not a feeling, it's a judgment. Okay? And it involves the recognition of the closure of a choice. I could and I should have been open to you, but I said, I'm too tired, I'm too lazy, I'm too self-preoccupied. This should be about me. Now, so sin, and Paul in Romans 14:23 says, whatever is not out of faith, ekpisteos, is hamartia, is sin. And I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
That faith and sin are the two poles. And elsewhere in Romans, he talks about them as being obedience and disobedience.
Yeah.
So it's fairly straightforward, I think.
Yeah.
So I think it's also important to distinguish sin from idolatry, because for a long time I tended to equate them. And the Bible has all kinds of stuff to say about idolatry.
Right.
Making false gods, taking something contingent and treating it as though it was necessary, making something created the center of your universe and revolving around that. But I've come in my age, I've come to understand that idolatry is actually the way we're constructed. We really can't not be idolaters.
Interesting.
Because we're instinctually impoverished. We don't molt. We don't, migrate. We're cursed with freedom. And so since we're not centered naturally, we have to center on something. Problem is, idolatry is, I want to be the world's best scholar. That's what I want to be. That's my goal. That's what I'm centering on. There's nothing wrong with that. But my 8-year-old child calls from the other room, "Daddy, come play with me. I'm lonely." Idolatry is natural. Sin is choosing the idolatry when a gift is available.
Right.
My daughter's plea for my company was a gift to me. She wanted to be with me. My making my scholarly paper more important is a refusal to discern.
Yeah, that gift.
As for redemption, I don't know what I think about it. The Christian theology has chosen one or two of the many metaphors in Paul by which he tries to express what Jesus has done for us. Paul uses economic language, that's redemption, right? We were in slavery, he bought us back. He uses cultic language. We were unholy, he's made us holy. He uses diplomatic language. We were alienated, now we're reconciled. He uses forensic language. We were, we were unjust and we've been justified. Courtroom language.
Yeah.
Paul doesn't choose from among them. In fact, he uses them indiscriminately.
Yeah.
I think that Christian theology, systematic theology, is oxymoronic. It is that there is nothing systematic about theology.
Yeah.
And what Christians have done is two things. They've tried to systematize what is inalienably diverse. They try to make one thing out of many things, like Paul's language.
Yeah.
Secondly, especially in the West, especially since Augustine and Luther and Calvin, redemption is the go-to frame or atonement because salvation is all about us.
Right.
The Eastern Fathers had a wholly different view, that Jesus' coming was to lift us into a condition like God's.
Yeah.
It wasn't to put a Band-Aid on our existence, right? And maybe God has a plan for all the other places in the universe where there may be animate and sentient and intelligent life. Let's quit whining and quit acting as though this were just about making us better.
Right.
It's God's mysterious plan, the letter to the Ephesians says, to bring everything to a head in Christ and to sit us at the right hand of God. That is what the Eastern Church calls, what does it call it?
Apotheosis.
Apotheosis. And I think it's a much healthier view of things than the kind of, okay, let's just read Romans 1-3. Boy, we have really screwed up.
Yeah, right.
And then, it's not even a very good reading of Romans.
Yeah, but it's certainly a deeper invitation that you've talked before about transformation.
Yeah.
And part of being divinized or living in apotheosis would be a turning away from self towards
Yeah.
God, and even maybe towards other people.
Well, that's exactly right. And not just maybe. The way we turn to God is by turning to other people. And the way we turn to other people is turning to God.
Yeah.
The Karl Rahner says that, genuine agape, that if our reach exceeds our grasp, and actually this goes back to Claude, what the hell is his name? I forget his name, but a French philosopher of the early 20th century. That in knowing and in willing, our reach exceeds our grasp. So that genuine acceptance of the other is accepting the ground of their being, which is God.
Yeah. Reaching beyond them to God.
Yeah, and that's where Rahner connects the love of the brethren and the love of God.
Yeah.
Is that actually they're not two things that you go from one to do the other. It's that it's the same kind of dialectic that I talked about with prayer and spirituality.
Yeah. I love it. Well, I'm sure we could keep going with other basics of faith, but this is probably enough for today and for our time together. Thank you for joining us for this Speaking of Faith installment. And Dr. Johnson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.